Burgess and Bolton's weekly wrap-up.
So welcome everybody to our 8th episode of Burgess and Bolton's weekly wrap-up, where we look at all things London market, including change, transformation, people and culture. As always, we've got a packed show today. Earlier this week, we caught up with Walid Sakif, who is the founder of Insureblocks, and we're going to play the first part of a really great interview that we had with him shortly after we've done the news. And then we've got our usual items. We're going to have a quick look at the news. We're going to have a bit of a wrap up in terms of the interview, and then we're going to go into our weekend activities just for a bit of fun. So let's move it on. So Ben, news of the week. I'll go first. So I saw a few things. Obviously, the big news this week was the announcement by the Chancellor of the Exchequer, Rishi Sunak, about the huge package of investment that's going to be played out into the economy over the next few months. Obviously, we're all going to get £10 each to go out and have lunch. So it's going to make a big difference.
If you can find anywhere that's still open.
The other big news. I don't know. For me, it wasn't I didn't want to not go out. I just didn't have the confidence to do it. I felt was the problem, rather than not having enough money. So it'd be quite nice to see an effective track and trace app working.
Well, it's quite complicated as well when you get to places. I've had to ask one place I went to in the week, which was my first sort of venture foray, I suppose, into social dining, which meant a beer at a golf course, was quite complicated working out, and everywhere's slightly different. So all these places you approach with a slight amount of trepidation going in, thinking, I don't really know how this works. It's like being in a foreign country somehow.
Yeah, it is. It's strange. I haven't been out yet, to be honest. I'm very nervous about the whole thing.
I'm more gung ho, more the gung ho end of the continuum.
Yeah, there we are. A pint at the golf course. My other news this week was this interview with Peter Cullen, who is talking about automated underwriting, and I thought it was interesting because it touched on a number of themes that we've been talking about over the last few weeks, and also events that I've been running as well, especially around data and how organizations need to think about data going forward in order to enable the technologies around automating and in this case underwriting. And I think it just plays into a kind of narrative that post-COVID, how much of the digital technologies that have been talked about for the last 10 years are actually going to springboard forward, and we're going to see real transformational change in organizations. One thing I thought I'd just Google is, when was the first time that automated underwriting was in the press? And I found this quick. So 2009 with the life insurance sort of automated processing that they have there for life insurance. So I mean, this has been around.
I don't know if you remember, but at one of the conference talks I did at your London Claims Conference, I actually focused, and I think it was probably 5 years ago, on a report that had come out about jobs and which jobs were going to be lost, and underwriters was quite high up the list, I think. And I think there were quite a few lawyers there, and lawyers was quite low down the list, and they looked rather smugly happy in the audience. But I was thinking about that phrase, which is that it's not the things that happen in the first year of but it's the things that happen in 5 years that are the fastest changes, and that's probably where we may be now with underwriting. I have to confess, on LinkedIn, I responded rather negatively to Peter Cullen, saying that I think it was a bit of a sort of lazy sort of thing to throw out there. I actually didn't mean particularly his main point, which I think is a good point. But I think we should now be talking much more about the detail and the causes and what's really going to happen, because we've been, as you say, talking about it for quite a long time now, this issue coming up. So I feel that we should have more knowledge, a bit more sense, and a bit of a better conversation rather than just saying everybody's jobs are going to go, because I don't think they are necessarily. I think they're going to change more than anything.
Yeah, exactly. I think change is the operative word there, and it probably plays into your news this week.
Yeah, well, I'm going to sort of conflate my stat of the week because we want to get onto Walid's interview, which is great. So I've been looking at a particular area that's been talked about as well for quite a long time, which is claims automation and the whole adjusting process. And I think this is interesting because a number of things that have come up into my inbox and in conversations have sort of come together. So the first thing is this chap here, Sean Ringstead, who's the Chief Digital Officer at Chubb. And he, back when we had other lives in 2019, was made this really, I think, very good statement, which I would pretty much completely agree with, which is that we are all still working with the same set of core insurance business principles that have stood the test of time, disciplined underwriting and keeping our promise to pay claims. But technology is helping us to make welcome changes in the customer experience. So that's, really sort of interesting. And we've talked about it on our show here, including the ability to buy and service policies and assist insurers with their decision-making and operations. However, we need to remain focused on our fundamentals and not lose sight of the importance of the human touch with our customers, especially in time of need. I think this is an incredibly good, balanced, clear statement from Mr. Ringstead at Chubb. And I'd say that now they must be really one of the leading businesses in the market now for this whole digital thing. So they really are one to watch. So then if we move on a bit, I pulled together to currently, so this is S&P report in business insurance, I think, in July. And Chubb is here again, and other businesses as well, but it still seems to me Chubb is leading the charge here, is talking about claims and their digital adjusting team. So this guy, Tim Barziza, says that they're doing a lot of work now, and that a quite high proportion, according to him, of their claims are now handled virtually. And also they're talking, obviously about using drones and webcams and everything else to record losses. So they're moving on, and they say somewhere else that they're investing $1 billion a year in this kind of technology and development. And then the final point here, and why it's stat of the week, is there's an acceleration, and there's an acceleration because of COVID, which is being said here, but also we're now going back to sort of what we might call normal stuff, which is the cycle of hurricanes and hurricane season, and the predicted quite high level of very major hurricanes. So they're forecasting at least 4 for this year. So if all of those things come together, and COVID and this investment in technology, I should think we might well be seeing quite a big leap forward, lurch forward maybe in the claims technology area. And that again could be one of these kind of tipping areas, so it somewhat probably depends on the hurricanes, but it's definitely something to watch, I think. And we'll be having a look at all of this in terms of the technology and how that gets invested in. But if you're behind as a player on this, it'll be very noticeable, I think, if you've not got this technology.
I agree, actually. And we had a session yesterday, which was a virtual roundtable, with operations directors, and we were essentially talking about kind of the back office functions and how you move from the work from home situation back to a work in the office situation, and how's that transition going to work, and what's it going to look like in the end. And I think 90% of their staff, and this was across the board with the whole group, said that they preferred working from home. So you've kind of got this buy-in from your people. You've also got this push from the top that kind of sees the cost savings as well for why not? It's an opportunity. And I think that in itself is enough to drive some of these changes. And I think you're right. Those that are behind the curve in terms of using technology to enable people to do their jobs better and more effectively, I think will be that, because it comes down to as your first clip showed.
Well, and certainly in the COVID situation, it will pay off, won't it? Because it will pay off with customers, and it will pay off because you have to do it. And anybody scrambling now, you know, that's going to be costly for them to catch up. So Chubb and others who've done this, I think, will be looking at how it is paying off. So it'd be really interesting to watch how that plays out over the next 6 months, I guess.
Yeah, great. Right, let's move things on. So
Hooray.
I've got a jingle. Here we go. Get of the week. So it's time for our guest of the week. So as I mentioned at the top of the show, we spoke to Walid from Insureblocks earlier this week, and this is part one of a two-part series where we talked to him about change, transformation, and his experience of the London market and trying to drive through some of that stuff. So I shall play that clip now. So welcome, Walid, and perhaps I could ask you, as I do with all the guests, how would you describe yourself in 3 words?
Entrepreneurial, adventurers, and daddy.
Homeschooling, like a lot of us.
Indeed.
And perhaps you could describe kind of your current role and kind of what you're doing now and how you got into what you're doing, and share some of those experiences about the journey.
Sure. So I'm the founder of Insureblocks. Insureblocks started off as a kind of a hobby exercise where I wanted to interview heads of blockchain in the insurance industry. And that was in March 2018. That kind of blew up to something a lot bigger, where I left where I was working, which was Beasley, in 2018, end of 2018, to focus 100% on Insureblocks. And what we do now is that we help companies to metamorphose themselves into digital natives. So you're a traditional company, how can you be something similar to Facebook or to an Amazon? And that's what we're here to help. It's not just about blockchain, it's about culture, it's about tech, which includes blockchain, AI, IoT, and big data. And that's what we do. And I'm delighted to have both Rory Unsworth and Mark Simpson as part of my team.
Good. Yeah. No, them both well.
Yes.
So that's really interesting. Sort of that it's a more holistic approach to kind of digital transformation. Where, in your experiences, where are companies kind of finding the biggest challenges in all of this? Is it the tech? Is it the culture? Is it a bit of both? What is it?
It's always culture. The tech is easy. I mean, if you've got the right culture, you'll overcome whatever tech challenges you come across. If you've got a culture that is willing to take some level of measured risk and is willing to accept some level of measured failures, then you will try different tech. You're not here to jump into a technology platform because it's the fab, such as blockchain. You understand your problems, and you have a willingness to try different approaches to test what could work. But that means communication. That means interacting with your customer, with your partners, and be able to look butt naked in front of everyone and say, hey, I'm wrong. Yeah. You got to have that kind of culture.
And Walid, there you also seem to touch on strategy, because I feel that often feel that there's a real weakness in this market compared with some of the others that I've worked in the past, in terms of real proper strategic, thorough thinking. So that some of the things you mention are just not part of the way that the people in the market operate, to think like that. So it's very hard to say what are their commercial objectives sometimes.
So when it comes to strategy, you've got to have, which is unfortunately a problem that exists, I've noticed a lot in Anglo-Saxon countries, which is less so in Asian countries, which have nearly a 20-year time span in terms of their strategy, which is, we're going to make some long-term bets. We know it's not going to happen within this CEO's lifetime and in the company. It may happen, in a few down the lines, but we understand that we need to make some long-term bets. And for that, our strategy is going to be based around that, But at the same time, it's going to be a strategy. It's going to be tuned to what are the problems today and what are the opportunities. Like for technology, you cannot look at a problem in isolation, in a silos. Everything is interconnected, whether we like it or not. And that means engaging with different tech platforms, engaging with different customer bases, engaging with different partners. And it is always this conversation. There's way too much, especially in the Nolan market, and I'll put maybe the brokers as an exception, this insular kind of hollow approach to a problem. We'll just talk between ourselves. We need to get out of our bubble, get out of our postcode, out of that country, and interact with people who are very different.
And so what are the kind of examples of that kind of resistance, Walid? I mean, I can give you probably lots, but what are the sort of experiences you've had as you developed your business?
So I know it's been used as an example by my colleagues at Beasley very often since I've left. But the best case scenario is I was given a project when I started at Beasley, which was, can you please look at this new proposition, which is we want to sell high-value insurance to people who have high-value watches, 5,000 pounds above. That was the proposition. Say, great, what's the status? They explained to me the status. And I looked at the plan and I said, who is the customer? Well, someone who's got a 5K watch and above. Great. How have you segmented it? We haven't. There's men, there's women. There's all kinds of different segments. Have you talked to them? No. All right. Am I responsible for this? Yes. Stop everything. Next thing I do, I went to the internal comms team and I said, send the next newsletter saying, I will give you free Krispy Kreme donuts if you come to my desk and tell me why you've got this watch. What's the story behind this watch? Then I went outside the building, Plantation Place, and I started going to all the local jewelers and asking, can I talk to you? Can I talk to your customers? And ask some simple questions. That gave me a lot of data, right? With this data, I then created a fake company called Montail. I put it out on Facebook and I spent some money, $200 in ads for people to complete a survey. I had something like 236 responses within 9 working days. With the quantitative data from that survey, with the qualitative one-on-one interviews I had done with my colleagues within Beasley, with people in the block who buy those watches from the jewelers, I had all the data to tell me that people didn't want the service. How much time did it cost? It cost my time as a contractor 9 working days and $200 in ads. That saved them a whole lot more if they were to go ahead and build it because someone felt that was the right product.
So that's so interesting. So, I mean, I've heard so many stories. I mean, not your bit of it, but I've heard so many stories about, and I've had the same thing happen to me when I go in and say, so what's your plan? And they just say, well, we're just going to sell this type of insurance to all these people. And I say exactly the same. Who are they? Why do they want it? What's the price? Yeah. But is that the bubble idea really, that even, people in this market have been too much within their institutions. They're just sitting there sort of, they have really no imagination, I suppose, because what you've just described to me, it seems, is you just had some ideas. You just tried some things out to prove your hypothesis.
I don't want to be too critical of them because I do think they have imagination, but perhaps they've been too afraid to tap into it. And you have to remember, I've got a very different background. I've got a background where Insureblocks, my present company, is my 6th startup. I've had 2 companies who nearly made me bankrupt. Literally, I had to very close to register I was bankrupt. 2 who broke even and 1 that was successful. Insureblocks hopefully will be the next successful one. But the point is that I can't do anything if I can't prove that I understand my customer base and how I'm building a solution that is better than the alternative one that they presently have. If I can't do that, there's no way anyone is going to give me a penny. So that kind of culture of starting very small, because you've only got, I don't spend more than £1,500 to prove my business case to start off. So it's literally sometimes just a pencil and paper. You go into a coffee shop and you interview people and you offer them free coffee and muffins. That's day 1. And then you suddenly take those paper and pencil and you do nice little wireframes, right? Again, spending virtually zero except a few muffins and coffees. But it is this kind of iterative approach that gives you the data to make informed decisions. As you grow up in seniority, you start becoming complacent. You think, I know it. It's my market. I've been doing this for 20 years. I understand it. But those millennials, I don't get them, but who cares about That's the whole thing, is that we become complacent, and we've got to keep ourselves in check.
Yeah. So, and insurers are like machines, aren't they? They are like, at times, when the market hardens, you can just turn the handle and make money. And I sometimes think that makes it more difficult because you've got this cycle that kicks in, and then they don't invest. They just go, well, let's trade and make some money. And that kind of justifies everything except for the last few years of losses.
It does. And then unfortunately, it's all markets. What we've seen in the last few years is that no industry is immune from the digital players now. None.
Right.
It's just a question of time where they think, okay, we've dominated this space. We're doing so well. I see an interesting opportunity here because it kind of touches my frontier of my kingdom, and I want to go and grab a little piece of that. Amazon, Google, Apple, they've all left their traditional place. If you go back to the late 80s, when Apple was just, the Apple IIe and maybe the Macintosh Plus at that time, if you told them you were going to build a mobile phone and Apple Watch and you can potentially go in the healthcare industry, I'm sure Steve Jobs would have said, no way, right? Just like Amazon went from selling books, now it's Amazon Web Services. All these guys, what they understood is that they get data. So they understand their customers really, really well. They can do some testing every day. They've got millions of users. They just need to test it on 0.1% to get some data that can help them make informed decisions. They can rapidly iterate. And the other point is, they're the ones who spend the most on R&D. Research and development budgets are enormous. I think, Amazon was $22.6 billion in 2018. I'll be curious to know what percentage that is of their total turnover, of course, but I'm sure it's bigger in terms of the percentage than most traditional companies.
So do you see that there is more and more investment, or is it still there is a reluctance to see the value?
So again, it comes back to this point, when you make investments, what is the kind of timeline or return are you expecting? Are you thinking in terms, well, it has to happen between the time I'm the CEO? I want to be able to leave my job saying that I kept the ship steady. I haven't rocked it. We're still making money. I don't want to be leaving and saying, we've just invested $5 billion and we're not quite sure if it's going to work. I don't want that to be my message. But whilst in other places, it is, okay, I'm building a foundation that in 10, 15, 20 years could lead to some great results, right? We don't have quite that mentality. That's a strong Asian one. Is, I would argue, possibly still a German one they used to have. But it's something I think we've lost in the Anglo-Saxon countries, unfortunately. But coming back to the digital, they're willing to take big bets. If you remember Netflix, when they started off, it was DVDs. They would put DVDs in the post, right? And then the founder, his name is escaping me at the moment, he basically said, we're gonna go and do it all on streaming. He had a revolt, but he stuck to his guns, and look what happened. He took that risk. It may have been a catastrophe. There is this element of timing. You've got to launch something at the right time. If you remember Boo.com, when it launched, it's all this 3D modeling, it was way too early, right? Yeah. We were still on 56K modems. So there is an element of timing that needs to be taken into consideration. But it is this culture of willingness to take bets that is important, which we don't have. Is it because the insurance industry is risk averse? We're managing those huge funds of money and we're afraid to take those kind of big bets. Perhaps then take small ones. Have a constructive dialogue with insurtechs. Let them take the bets for you. But you got to have this dialogue.
It's really interesting because it's something you said last week, Ben, I think when we were talking about it, or it was perhaps a couple of weeks ago with Peter, where we were saying everyone's looking for that next big wave and they're actually missing a succession of waves that are passing them by while they're looking for the one that is the safe bet that will take them, all the way in. Where, as you're saying, it's small steps, it's small waves that you need to get onto. And I also think there's something else, just thinking back to other interviews around this short-termism within, boards or senior management, and that need to have financial reports and have return on investment. And what's talked about a lot in the conferences that we run and when I talk to people in the industry is this this idea of fail fast, but I think they don't get what that means. Because they think, well, we'll try it. If it fails, we'll throw it away, rather than we'll try it. It doesn't quite work. We'll learn the lessons, and then we'll have another iteration. So, taking on the wave analogy, a step further. So I just wondered, that was definitely the case 2 years, 18 months ago. I just wondered from your experience whether any of that old kind of thinking has moved on, and do you see the kind of, not the next generation, but another set of leaders coming up that are more willing to take the risks that you're talking about?
I haven't. I'll be honest. I
Okay.
haven't. If there is someone that has come, show them to me. I mean, a lot of those leaders who could have grown and flourished potentially in those companies have left and created their own insurtech. You had me on this show with Ben Rose. He was at Munich Re, and he's like, "Screw this, I'm off. I'm going to build something," because unfortunately, these are not environments that are here to support innovation and has the right cultural mindset again to support this kind of innovation. Yeah, I know. When I was at Beasley, and I know in other insurance companies, they have those innovation departments, and they try to go from a grassroots level, say, hey, we want to encourage innovation within the company. Great. Very often it's just a PR logo, which they put on the wall, and no one really looks at it. Then you do have a few individuals say, actually, I do have an idea. I'd like to play it out. They need to get that line manager to approve it, right? Line manager most of the time says, I'm sorry, I need you. You're busy right now. If you want to do it in your spare time. Okay, fine. But, I've got 2 kids. I come home. I don't have a huge amount of spare time. Can I just, 10% of my working time? No, sorry. Because he doesn't believe in it. Sometimes you do get a good line manager, but the person who wants to create that idea does not know how to build a good business case, right? Doesn't have the skills to make an argument in terms of, this is what I'd like to do. Can you coach me, right? And then, of course, you go back to the line manager, and they're willing to support you, but they don't have the coaching skills. So there is a network of things that needs to be put in place for innovation to flourish. But there's this one thing which, unfortunately, I think no enterprise, and that's not at all just because of insurance, any enterprise will have that, is an entrepreneur works extremely hard because they know they've got £3,000 or £5,000 which to build their startup and to live on. If they don't do that, they go hungry or they can't pay their rent. How can you have that same kind of focus when you have your free coffee machine at the office, you've got your monthly salaries, you got your fruit basket, you're safe. You don't have that same focus.
So that was really good, wasn't it, Ben? I thought there was so many points in there that we could talk about and really expand on. It's really nice actually to listen back to the interview and just have a chance to think about that. And certainly that long-term versus bets versus short-termism is a massive problem, and it's not just insurance. I mean, that's across the board. But that final piece around the entrepreneurial spirit, that obviously resonates with us because we've set up our own businesses and we completely get it. We look at those numbers every week and go, right, what's it mean for the business? What's it mean for me? So
I think the point that you take out of that, and Walid makes very well, is and it's been made in other interviews that we've done, is the what's the motivation, what's the driver here for people, back to people again, to actually make change happen, to sell it in, to push it up the line, to get leadership on board. I think that's really key. It's always, I think there's a piece of research that's been done saying, it's often the middle management that is the most resistant to this change because in some ways they feel they've got the most to lose, I guess, and the least to gain. So it's quite difficult, particularly, when you've got that kind of, if you like, that sludgy middle that's described, to do that. And I have talked a lot about competition, and I think in the end it somehow has to come down to competition, that has to, which we were touching on this earlier with technology. And I do know that once these businesses start to see someone getting ahead, of them, there's that real fear of missing out and that we're going to be losing out. So that is positive about the market, and I think it's something people should encourage more of. Actually, I think part of this complacency comes because of what has often been described as what's the point in having first mover advantage. If you take London, there's a lot of people will say, well, there's no point in launching a product because that will be copied, or we have to be open about it anyway. We can't protect our IP, So I think finding ways to create that competition and for that to happen will help. But yeah, I think Walid's such a positive guy and such a positive force, as many of these pathfinders are. But everybody expresses the same kind of frustration about the culture and that resistance, and he describes it so well. I think that it's about individual interactions almost.
Yeah, it is, and I think we're starting to build up a picture through these interviews and through these shows about what those challenges are, and perhaps we'll in the future put the top 5 or 6 together and get an industry leader on to see how they feel about them.
Absolutely,
at the other end of the spectrum.
I think just very quickly, one theme I think that's also coming through is this theme about the tech businesses coming. And I think this has been a kind of ebbing, flowing conversation about whether the Googles or Amazons. Now, I don't care who it is, but I think the point about the investment, I looked up after we did the interview. Amazon did spend. This was 2017 numbers as well, so they did spend 22.6 billion, which was actually 3% of the US GDP, believe it or not, on R&D alone. But then if you take the top tech companies, and it's all the tech companies, they spent in 2017 76 billion on R&D. So the point about the data and the ability for them to move at pace and iterate, they've got to look at insurance, and they are looking at it. And whether those challenges come directly from the Googles or the Amazons, it doesn't really matter. It is going to come, and it's pretty I don't know, it's pretty inevitable. And also I think the data thing is going to be the key to it in the end. That's what's going to make the big difference. But so good. We got number 2 from him, haven't we, after
part 2. So we'll have part 2 for you next week, where we'll explore a little bit more about entrepreneurialism and his experience of that in the supermarket. That's to look forward to.
Yeah, in this case, the sequel's always better. The sequel's better, isn't it?
Yes,
than the original, like The Godfather.
Yes, that's it. Moving on. Right. So wrapping things up, Ben. What have you got on this weekend?
The good weather's back. So I'm going, it's my daughter's birthday, so we're going out for the day on Sunday with her. That's lovely. Looking forward to that. It's going to be brilliant.
So so we're seeing friends as well. It's kind of bittersweet because they're leaving. They're moving back to Belgium, which is a bit of but Belgium is closer to us than Lancashire, so we'll probably see more of them than my parents. So swings and roundabouts.
Yeah, we should name the most famous Belgians next week.
Oh, I could. Oh, yeah, I'll rock at that.
I think there's only 2.
Eddie Merckx. Is he Belgian?
That's one.
That's one. Good.
Not much of a feature then next week.
Tune in next week to hear the other famous Belgian.
I think there's only 2. I don't know who the other one is.
We've got a week to find out. All right, very good. Thank you very much, Ben. See you next week. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Jeremy. Have a great weekend, everyone.
You too.
Bye.
Burgess & Bolton's Weekly Wrap-Up.